Good evening, everyone. My name is Judy Blake, and I am located in Houston, Texas. I am a program coordinator for the phenomenal Family to Family Network. I have joined with me this evening Leonella Castillo, my wonderful colleague, and
Hi.
I have Uni Patron, who is our amazing intern from the Philippines, who is with us through the end of April at Family to Family Network. This evening, we are going to talk about top tips for successful ARD meetings. My co-host, Leslie Lawson, could not be with us tonight, so it will just be me. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping notes. Always know that every presentation that we give, this is a very safe space. There is no judgment here. There is a lot of information, and we don't expect people to remember everything. If you can remember even 2 or 3 items, that's wonderful. If you feel uncomfortable asking a question, don't hesitate to just private message one of us, and we'll be happy to ask the question on your behalf. We hope to finish in an hour, and you will be sent the recording and the slides when we're finished. Next slide, please. So, tip number 1. Please know that you know your child best. You know them better than anyone else. And you have rights as a parent regarding the special education process. What we always encourage families to do is to make sure that they learn their rights and understand them so that they can advocate for their child and empower themselves and their child. So, regarding your rights, you want your child to receive what we call FAPE, and that's an abbreviation that means free and appropriate education. And what FAPE does is it requires schools to provide special education to meet the unique needs of each child. So, for example, Leonella's son has a different plan than my son did. My son is 29 years old. And those rights that you have as a parent are mandated by federal law. Next slide, please. And that federal law is the IDEA manual. So IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Again, that is federal law. And what that does is to make sure that public schools are serving those educational needs of students with disabilities. The IDEA manual is in English and Spanish. And I apologize because I think we need new links, Leonella, and I forgot to update the slide. My apologies. And Leonella can post them in the chat as to what those new links are. What's important to know is that with the IDEA manual, it's important to learn it, read it, use it, and you want to take it with you to each meeting. What happens when you do this is that the school then sees you as an equal member of the ARD committee, of that IEP team. And they know that you know your rights. So we will update the links for you in the chat box.
They're updated on the slide.
Oh, they are updated on the slide. Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much, Leonella. My mistake. And it's important that you follow the IDEA manual because that will explain exactly what your rights are as a parent. Next slide, please. So the IEP, and it depends where you are in the process. Some of you may know what that means and some of you might not, but it's an individual education plan or program. I've heard both terms. But the IEP is that centerpiece. It's that centerpiece of federal legislation that we call the Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And what that ensures is that our children with disabilities have available to them that free, appropriate public education that we talked about in the previous slide. And it emphasizes special education and any related services, and it's preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living. And it's meeting their unique needs. I realize that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, my child is only 5 years old, I can barely get through the end of the day. How can I even predict the future? No one is asking you to predict the future. We just want you to know that the law and schools are to be preparing your child for that further education, employment, and independent living. You want to think of the IEP as a contract, and it's a contract between you and the school. Being the parent or caregiver, you want to make sure that you participate in the development of that individualized education program. Because the more that you are involved in the IEP, the more customized and unique it will be to your child. You always want to make sure that you understand what you are agreeing to. Next slide, please. So what should you do before the ARD meeting, before that IEP meeting? It's really important to gather information. What you don't want to happen is that you walk into the meeting, you've never met anybody, you've never seen any reports, and you really aren't sure what is happening with your child. You always want to get, before the meeting, draft copies of evaluations, present levels of academic achievement, and functional performance. We call that PLAFP, which I know is quite the abbreviation. Find out what the proposed IEP goals are and objectives. What kind of therapy is your child getting? And do you have any therapy notes from a speech therapist, an occupational therapist? Is your child in multiple classes? And if they're in multiple classes, find out from those teachers, how is your child doing in those classes? So you want to make sure that you gather information, because IEPs are done every year and children are evaluated every 3 years. So you want to make sure that you have the most current information, because then it allows you to plan for the next school year. You want to read through these documents ahead of time, and you want to know what people are talking about. None of this should be a surprise to you at the IEP meeting. Next slide, please. So, evaluation. You need to know that all services that a child needs, those are based on that initial evaluation. Initial meaning the first time the school evaluates your child. So what happens is you have that initial evaluation, and then data collection and further assessments are based on that initial evaluation. So on that initial evaluation, there's a timeline, again, mandated by law. The school has X number of days to complete the evaluation, to write up the report, and then to meet with you. If you want any reevaluations, or you feel your child needs something else, there is no timeline for that. There's no required deadline. So you always want to make sure that on that initial evaluation, that you're asking for your child to be evaluated in all areas of suspected disability. So if your child has maybe a speech delay, have them tested for autism. Make sure that you know that you can ask. Hello, Ava. Thank you for joining us. And you want to make sure that you have them evaluated if there's a fine motor delay, if there's a speech delay, if there's some behavior challenges, social skills, things like that. So you can always make sure that you put in writing and have your child evaluated in all areas of suspected disability. Next slide, please. Tip number 6. So it's meeting time. If possible, try not to go alone to a meeting. I think that it can be really intimidating because you have all of these people around the table. Some of them you might know, some of them you don't know. And I think that it's important to have another set of ears, another set of eyes. And when you do that, it just is comforting to you. It also allows you to have somebody maybe take notes, provide moral support. It's not as though you necessarily need to bring an advocate, but just try to bring someone who knows your child. At a minimum, if they at least know you well and they know what works best for you, then that will be a huge comfort to you. Make sure that you explain to them what the meeting's going to be about, what concerns you may have. Maybe that person could take notes. There is an art agenda that the school is supposed to follow, and that agenda has specific steps that are supposed to be followed. Maybe the person you bring with you can make sure that they're being followed in the correct order. It's also important to take your child to the meeting. I realize that your child is technically not involved in ARD meetings until high school, but I always brought my son, who is now 29, I always brought him to every meeting, even for a few minutes. What are his likes? What are his dislikes? What does he like most at school? Because it allows the committee to see your child and to make sure that they have a face associated with a name, associated with the documents that they are looking at. So we think that by having your child meet the committee, that sets the tone as well. And it gets used to your child attending these meetings. We had a parent this afternoon on our earlier call that said they started their child coming to the meetings at 7 p.m. Or excuse me, not at 7 p.m. in 7th grade is what I meant to say. Technically, the child didn't have to start until 9th grade, but they had their child start to come in 7th grade. And I think that's a really great idea. I used to have my son Ryan come just for a couple of minutes. So this is something that you might want to consider. Next slide, please. Tip number 7. So during the meeting, make sure that you ask questions. That's what you're there for. You are a very important part of the committee. And at the end of the day, it is your child that this plan is being created for, this individualized education plan. So you want to know what people are talking about. You want to ask questions. And if you don't understand something, tell them you need to stop the meeting and you need to understand what it is that they are talking about. I received an email the other day, and it had an abbreviation that I was not familiar with. And it was SME. And I knew that DME was durable medical equipment, but this was SME. So I actually emailed the person. Didn't matter to me if she was concerned that I didn't know. I needed to understand that in the context of her email. And it turns out SME is subject matter expert. It's important to know that you can ask those questions, and you should ask those questions simply because if you don't understand what's being discussed, how can you properly advocate for your child? Ask for data to support the decision that they're making. Ask how that data is being collected. and ask for support if you need it. If you ask a yes or no question, you're going to get a yes or no answer. So if you asked something like, is Billy busy the entire day? Yeah, they're going to say, yes, Billy is. But maybe you should ask, what does a typical day look like for Billy? That way you can understand what the schedule is and what his day is like. You should typically know that even before going into the meeting, but you just want to make sure that you ask those open-ended questions. You also want to ask things like, what will it take if there's a certain request that you have? What is it going to take to make this happen for my child? Just a note that you always want your child, if possible, to be in the least restrictive setting as possible. And if your child is in a class with only special education the entire day, that's okay. But just know that they also learn from their typically developing peers, and those typically developing peers also learn from your child. So you want to ask them, what could be done to maybe change the schedule, to have my child included more? Because once you do that, then it allows the committee to brainstorm. Next slide, please. So during the school year, make sure that you meet and communicate all year with the staff and any professionals that work with your child. You don't want to just walk into the ARD meeting and this is the first time or the only time that you all meet with each other. You want to make sure that you're working together. We always encourage families to work collaboratively with schools. You want to make sure that you're working together and not apart, because at the end of the day, this is all about your child. So you want to make sure that you're meeting to discuss any concerns that you have. I used to probably email my kids' teachers, maybe once or twice a week. How's it going? If there was something upsetting at home, I made sure to let the teachers know. I think that our teachers are going through so much right now, and we need to support them as much as possible. At the same time, we need to balance that with making sure that your child's needs are being met. So set up a communication system that works best for you. I used to have a folder, and then it turned into a binder because I had so much information. Teachers may not be able to reply immediately. One thing you do want to make sure of, though, is that if the teacher calls you or mentions something to you in carpool line or during lunch, if you happen to be there at that time, you always want to follow up with an email and make sure that everything is in writing. Because if it's not in writing, something could be forgotten and somebody could say, I don't remember saying that, and that doesn't apply to your child. So you always want to make sure that it's in writing. And if the school happens to call you, that's fine. Then you can just follow up. Oh, dear Mr. So-and-so, thank you for calling me today. From what I understand, Mary will have A, B, and C, or whatever it is that was discussed. But make sure you send a copy to yourself and always have it documented in writing. Next slide, please. So again, document, document, document. We can't say that enough. So often parents might call and say, yes, somebody from the school called, but I don't remember who it was. Make sure you get their name. What is their title? Why are they the ones calling you? If it's a name you're not familiar with, like your child's teacher. But always make sure that you get that information so you know who to follow up with if you have more questions. We have talked about in previous sessions about the procedural safeguards, and we want to make sure that we bring it up again. Procedural safeguards, again, they are written to protect parents and to make sure that you understand your rights. And within procedural safeguards, which should be given once a year, it's called prior written notice. And what that means is, and there's a link there if you want more information on what that is, the school just can't arbitrarily, they just can't, in their own terms, on their own time, refuse or change something. You need to make sure that you are involved in that process. And that's 5 school days notice that you should be given for that prior written notice. So if the school sends you an email and said, oh, Stacy can be discharged from speech therapy starting today, it doesn't work that way. You want to make sure that there's data to support that. It needs to be discussed. And you might need to have a meeting for it. If the school said to you, say you emailed the school and said, I think my child, might have dyslexia and I want them to be tested. No, we don't think they have dyslexia, so we don't need to test them. Again, it doesn't work that way. They need to explain, well, why wouldn't you need to test them if I think my child has dyslexia or autism or any other kind of disability? So just make sure that you're aware of prior written notice. Next slide, please. Get educated. We know that you've had a long day as parents, and we appreciate you joining us tonight. We're going to be having another training session in April. You want to make sure that you understand your child's disability. I always feel badly for parents when they call me, and they might be a little bit on the shy side. And I ask them if they know what their child's disability is. It could be autism, it could be a rare disability, it could be a genetic disability, something chromosomal. And sometimes they will actually say to me, I don't really understand. Well, you need to be able to understand what your child's disability is and how your child is impacted by it, because that's how you can plan and create that individualized education program for your child. But if you don't know what the disability is and how it impacts your child, it's kind of hard to plan. There are so many training classes out there. I, of course, always love ours. I think we do a great job at training, but there's others as well through the school district, other parent organizations. If you're not on Facebook, please go ahead and join. You can like Family to Family Network, and we will always post our trainings and other important events and legislative items that you should know about as a parent helping your child. Always make sure that you use an ARD agenda. Sorry, dogs are barking. Always make sure that you use an ARD agenda to keep yourself organized during the meeting. It's really, really important that you do that so that all of the steps that are taking place during the meeting are being followed. We've given you a link called Texas Project First. It's an incredible website that Family to Family Network oversees, and it's in both English and Spanish. It is written by parents and for parents. And there's a search bar at the top, and you can actually put in there ARD agenda. You could put in there procedural safeguards. You could put in there dyslexia. You could put in all sorts of things, and it will bring up information to you to help educate you. But great website, texasprojectfirst.org, and thank you for putting that in there. Make sure that you have the tools that you need to help you understand about the special education process. Texas Project First is the great website. There's also another website that's wonderful called navigatelifetexas.org. And Leonella is going to type that in the chat box as well. That website is also wonderful because Google translates it into probably 37 different languages. And I love the diversity in Houston. And what's great is that Google allows you to translate what is written so that you can understand it in your native language. There is also the IDEA manual that we mentioned, and there's also parentcompanion.org. That's wonderful, and also in English and Spanish. If you have a child birth through, I believe it's 5 years old, maybe 6 years old, but just lots of great resources and information. What we always try to do at Family to Family Network is to give you those credible resources. There's always so much information on the internet, and some of it's accurate, but I'm sorry to say that some of it is inaccurate. What we try to give you is accurate information so that you are never misled. Next slide, please. Organization. So we know that our lives are so overwhelming. Parents are working 1 job, 2 jobs, juggling multiple kids and schedules. Some of you are what I call the sandwich generation, which is what I used to be. I was taking care of my mom, taking care of my children, and that's really overwhelming. If at all possible, try to organize your materials, evaluations, report cards, IEPs, any kind of notes and emails. Have them in a folder or a binder because you want to be able to access those documents easily should you ever have to recall some information. And it also just helps you to stay organized by having that folder, having that binder, so that you can keep everything in order, because the teachers and the school, they're juggling hundreds of kids with IEPs, hundreds of kids who are having ARD meetings. So if you're organized, it also helps them. Next slide, please. So just know on tip number 12 that you do not have to agree with the ARD committee. You can disagree. If you have never been to an ARD meeting before, maybe you're new to Houston, maybe your child's in ABA therapy, maybe he or she is at a preschool and you're just now entering public school, you can disagree. We always want to try to work with the schools. I go typically by the 80-20 theory. And what I mean by that is that you want to, if 80% of the time you're getting what your needs are for your child, there's always maybe going to be that 20% that doesn't quite work. Pick maybe 3 items that are most important to you for your child and really focus on those items. We would love for it to be picture perfect and for everything that parents ask their children receive. I can tell you, I have wished so much that my son would have received occupational therapy in school. I really wish that he would have. But once he reached a certain age, it was impossible to do that because the school district sees it as an educational need and it has to be educationally relevant. And because they were using computers, it wasn't as though he couldn't use a computer or type on it. It's just he had terrible penmanship and spacing and things like that. Again, it wasn't the fight I was going to keep fighting. So just know that you can disagree. For example, say the school says to you, your child belongs in a special education class all day. And you're thinking, I don't want them in special education all day. You would like them to be in in regular education and be integrated with their peers. If that's something that you really want for your child, please do not agree and sign the last page. That's okay to disagree. If the school evaluates your child and states there's maybe a speech delay, and maybe you're thinking your child has autism, maybe they have a sibling that has autism and you're thinking this child does as well, you can always request an independent evaluation provided to you at no cost and paid for by the school. So if you don't agree with the program or services, you'll be given an opportunity to write down what you do not agree to. And if you don't understand something, ask questions. If you still don't understand something, make sure that you ask the question a different way until you understand. Maybe the meeting needs to be tabled. Maybe you've been at it for a couple of hours and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I just can't comprehend anymore. Maybe it needs to be tabled and to come back the next day or the day after. Just know that if you disagree, you want to make sure that your written statement is reflected in the IEP in the minutes of that individualized education plan. Because if there is no statement of disagreement, the committee will think that you agree with them. And adding to that and following up on that, if you could go to the next slide, Uni. You would have what we call a reconvene meeting or another meeting. And that should be scheduled within 10 days of the original IEP meeting. The ARD committee can extend that, but that's always the default period, is that 10 days. And during that recess, you want to make sure that you and the school are working together to gather more information, and especially if you don't understand the process. Because what happens is you want to come back after that 10 days or whenever the meeting is rescheduled and try to reach an agreement. You can also request what we call a state facilitated IEP. If you want this, you must do this within 5 days of the first disagreement. So say you reconvene, you have another meeting in 10 days, and you still disagree. What will happen is the school will implement the plan that they feel is best, and then parents must take the next step to resolve the disagreement. You can request mediation. You can file a complaint with the TEA, which is the Texas Education Agency, or you can file for due process hearing. Again, I do believe that schools want to work with parents. Parents want the best for their child, and I completely understand that. I think that our schools need more support. Teachers are very overwhelmed, and there's a shortage of teachers, especially special education teachers. Next slide, please. Always try to have a vision for your child. The whole purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is to make sure that your loved one is prepared for further education, employment, or independent living as needed. So that IEP, you want to make sure that it gets you to that destination. It's like a map, if you will. And I realize, again, if your child is young, that you're not going to know what the future holds. None of us do. But you want to make sure that there's a vision. And as your child gets older and has certain likes and dislikes, their elective classes should be structured around those interests. If you don't go to the meeting without a clear vision of what it is that you want for your child, it's going to be very challenging once they are dismissed and graduated from school. A lot of kids typically graduate at 18, but students with disabilities, they can stay through age 21, and schools do have post-high school programs. My son actually attended his high school for a 5th year, and then he went to a post-high school program for a year. So he actually didn't graduate until he was about 20. But it's important to have hopes and dreams for your child. Even though your child has a disability, that doesn't mean they can't achieve great things. My son is 29, he works part-time, he goes to a social skills class, he goes to a social group for dinner on Tuesday nights, and no child ever rises to low expectations. So you want to make sure that you have high expectations for your child, because if you have high expectations, they will also want to succeed and continue and grow. Next slide, please. So I realize that this is not a top tip for successful ARD meetings, but we wanted to make sure that you have your child signed up for what we call the interest list for the Medicaid waivers. This is different than Medicaid. Medicaid is the health insurance that your child might have. These are waiver programs, and the purpose of these waivers is so that our children do not live in institutions, in what we call state-supported living centers. There are 13 of them in Texas. And probably 40 years ago, we thought people with disabilities should be segregated. They should be secluded. We thought, oh, they'll be protected, they'll be safer. Well, then we realized people with disabilities want lives just like the rest of us. And last time I checked, there was not a McDonald's only for people with disabilities. There was not an HEB only for people with disabilities. People at movie theaters have disabilities and some don't. So it's important to know that in community living, they can live in the home with support. Maybe they can live in a group home. And that's what these waiver programs are for. Sadly, there is a very long list. So if you're on this call, or in this session, I should say, and you do not know what the waiver programs are, CLASS, HCS, Texas Home Living, please email us. And the next couple of slides are going to go over what those programs are briefly. Next slide, please. You want to make sure that you sign up today. If you're in Harris County, you'll see that we have the information there, and we also have it for Fort Bend County. So you want to make sure that your child, at a minimum, is signed up for 3 waivers. CLASS, which stands for Community Living and Support Services, HCS, Home and Community-Based Services, and Texas Home Living. Those would, at a minimum, be the 3 waivers that you want your loved one signed up for. We also listed a couple of website links so that you have more information about that. Regards to the Harris Center, and if you live in Fort Bend County, their local authority is called Texana. And what that is the local authority. They have a mental health component, and they also have an intellectual and developmental disability component, or division, if you will. And they provide resources, support to families, children, and adults who have any kind of disability. If you need to know who your local authority is, you can see under any other county, there's a link there, and you can find out what yours is. If you're in the Galveston area, it's the Gulf Coast Center. If you're in Conroe, the Woodlands area, it would be Tri-County Behavioral Health. But that website link at the bottom of this slide will help you find that. Next slide, please. And here's just a brief overview of the waiver programs and the numbers to call and what they do. So you want to make sure that your loved one is signed up because it takes probably 15 to 18 years for their name to come to the top of the list. The parent's income is not taken into account once your child's name comes to the top of the list. Your child will be evaluated again, and they will let you know whether or not your loved one qualifies for this waiver slot. But just know that it does not take the parent's income into account. Next slide, please. There you go. Questions? And I think the next slide has the survey link and a QR code. So this is a grant-funded program, and it's really important that you complete the survey. We want to make sure that we are giving you the information that you need and that what we're telling you is very helpful to you. Leonella, if you could type the survey link in the slide again, and then Uni, if you could stop sharing. So Maria, I did get your last name. Alex, what is your last name? And Ava, what is your last name? If you don't feel comfortable, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Gillian, thank you.
Gillian, like Guillen?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. And Ava, what is your last name, please? Or you can send it to Leonella or myself if you don't feel comfortable. And Felix, does your last name begin with a D? I believe it does, just checking.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you for joining us. I'm so happy you did. And Ava, we just need your last name. If you could, you can send it to Leonella or myself.
She wrote it on the chat. She put.
Oh, she did. Oh, okay. My apologies. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Ava. I appreciate it. So glad you all joined us. Any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Did you all find this help? Oh, your mic is not working. No problem. If there's any question that you would like me to ask on your behalf, please type it to me. Do any of the others have any questions for me?
I have a question about those three waivers, the minimum.
Sure.
Three. Are you gonna send those out like a link, email or? So
what I will do is once you complete the survey, what I will do is go ahead and send you the slides and the recording. And what you can do is you just call those numbers. Your child though should be on the interest list already, are they not?
He's on two of them. I never heard the third one, the Texas Home.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and it's possible may not be. You can always call them and ask them about that, because both of those, both the HCS and the Texas Home Living are administered through the Harris Center or through what we call the local authority. It's possible that you didn't have to sign up for that one because signing up for HCS also signed you up for Texas Home Living. I'm not sure on that, but what you can do, are you in Harris County, Felix?
Fort Bend.
Fort Bend. So what you can do is call the number that you did for Texana, or the number that I had on the slide, and I'll send that slide deck to you, and you can call them to see if they needed to be added for Texas Home Living.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Great question. If either of the other parents have any questions, please. Oh, can we have the slide? Oh, yes. I will make sure I send that slide to you. No problem. You'll be getting the slide deck. I'll try to do it this evening. If not, it'll be tomorrow. And I'll make sure that you have that. Any other questions for you?
Oh, I'm just wanted to say that this morning, my lunch period is only 30 minutes, so I got the first 30 minutes. So
Okay,
so now I
no
got the other
problem.
30 minutes.
No problem. No problem at all. I'm very, very glad that you came back for the next part.
There is
So,
there is another question.
yes, I see that here. I was already told, signed up, but there is no confirmation number. Yes, you can check, oh, what is the information? You know, Ava, if you could email me that question, there's a phone number to call or a website to check, and I just can't think of what it is. Do you remember, Leonella? You're on mute.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's
No,
okay.
but I can look it up and put the links here.
Yeah, I just can't remember what it is, Ava. But this was like, I think in the last 6 months, where you can call someone and they will tell you not necessarily where you are on the wait list, but they will tell you, for example, if you signed up in 2018, they'll tell you what kids are having their names come up and what year they signed up. So it kind of gives you an idea. I can tell you that the average wait is about 15 to 18 years, which is really, really heartbreaking. That's why it's so important for everybody to get their child's name on the list and to do it early. But Leonella is looking that up. And if for some reason we don't have it, by the time we end this call, Ava, would you mind emailing me? My email is listed in there, and also emailing Leonella, and then we can find out that information for you so you can check. Yes, sounds great. That would be great. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed the presentation. I'm so glad it was helpful. It's our pleasure. We really believe in what we do. We're very passionate about what we do, and we want our kids to be all they can be and to really live to their fullest potential. That is our goal at Family to Family Network. So yeah, just go ahead and email us, and we will find out the either phone number or the website that you can check to see where your child is on that list. Any other questions? I think that was it then. Okay, Maria or Alex, if you don't have any questions, if you do, feel free to email Leonella and myself. If all of you could please make sure that you complete the survey, we would really appreciate it. That's how we get more grant funding, and it's really important that we are delivering the services that our families need. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you again in April. We'll be sending out more emails, and our next topic will be about the Medicaid system, about buy-in, how to apply for Medicaid, who qualifies for Medicaid, and how that works. So stay tuned, because we will be having a guest presenter for that topic. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the evening.